Welcome into the Faith First podcast. So glad you're here with us today. My name is Pastor Craig Brown. I'll be your host. We are with First Lutheran Church in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, community of faith where we discover more together. This is episode 98 on March 13th, 2025. On the episode today, we are talking with Dr. Grover from the Cedar Rapids School. She's a superintendent, newish. She's talking to us about potentially renovating McKinley Middle School, among other things, some changes proposed in our area. McKinley, just 2 doors down from us here at First Lutheran, and a lot of our kids go there, and we have some teachers over there. So I think it'll be a really good conversation, and we'll learn a lot about what the Cedar Rapids School District is proposing. Also, have you ever thought while you wait of it being an act of service to others? Pastor Steve will be here with us to talk about that scripture, and Sheila Anderson will be here to pray with us. We're glad you're along with us as well. Let's go ahead and get things started and put our faith first.
And so my voice still has so much of that southern accent. I would go in stores and they'd be like, I heard you before.
Well, we are talking about what's brewing around First Lutheran Church and the community now. Have a special guest with us, Dr. Grover, the newish Cedar Rapids Superintendent of Schools. Can I call you new anymore? Has you been on the job now long enough where?
No, I think I would really appreciate being called new because there's still so many things I'm learning. And in many ways, on-the-job training is occurring daily. But I'm very grateful to be here in Cedar Rapids and being a part of the Cedar Rapids Community School District.
And we were just chatting there as we're getting started about you mentioned your accent. People pick up on it. Where are you from originally?
Yes, I was born and raised in Alabama, a small rural town. I think probably more of a farm girl than I really represent these days. And so a lot of memories from rural Alabama.
We got to ask now, you and I, what did you farm?
My grandpa, as well as my dad, he's still into cattle. They do a lot of the cattle. But for whatever reason, I just remember a lot of the crops, like the summers of picking peas, having to take bushels and bushels to market and trying to sell off some of the crops. In many days, I don't think I picked the best because I didn't usually make, I didn't have a lot of earnings. Yeah. But it was a lot of hard work that has definitely stuck with me.
Would you get paid by the pea?
Yeah, you get paid by the weight. So you kind of have to work really hard.
That little girl, she's not picking up any peas at all.
Not at all, but at the end of the day, I would be like stomping. I'd be like, I'm never coming back. But I love going with my grandpa, though. So those are like some of the good old days of just when life was simple.
Yeah. Well, I was born and raised in Iowa, right here. And my worst job I've ever had was detasseling corn. And you just pull the tassel, pull it. It's just monotonous for 10, 12 hours, plus the heat. And it was just, I don't want to go there. Bad memories. But 13 years old.
We all have to pay our dues.
Right, yeah. And here we sit. So we're having you on today because our mutual friend, Slayton Thompson, who's a member of our church, said, well, you tell the story. He came up to you and said, you called me, right?
Yes, I think so. Definitely, he really appreciates First Lutheran, just your involvement in the community, how you care about people. And I think we all unify around our care and concern for the youth. And so he knows that outside of being a superintendent, I'm a woman of faith. I believe deeply, and I know that God has a plan for my life, and there's a purpose in everything we do. And so just seeing life and the assignment bigger than just a job. And so I really appreciate the opportunity just to be here today.
Yeah, we appreciate having you. I'm so glad that Slayton mentioned it because when we called and talked before the podcast, you said you've got a pretty big bond referendum coming up here, $210 million, is that what I read? New middle school, fixing up the old schools. And so I think we have a lot of people who are in our congregation either care about Cedar Rapids schools or we have a lot of teachers. Oh my gosh, we had the former superintendent, Dr. Lou Finch, and his wife Artie are members here. It seemed like every high school principal that ever was. Bill Jacobson at Jefferson, Ralph Plegman, Dr. Plegman at Washington, Mary Ochinsky at Kennedy.
Wonderful.
They're all members here. So my point is, I'm rambling on and on, but we care about education here at First Lutheran Church.
Yes.
And this is an important issue to think about. So what can you tell us about this bond coming up?
Well, I think you bring up a very important point just kind of right out of the gate, and that is really looking at the historical aspects of Cedar Rapids Community School District. Like you mentioned, all the people, and I've been fortunate enough to meet a lot of those folks too. They've given me a lot of great insight. And, one of the things that has been striking to me is the Cedar Rapids Community School District was established back in like 1855. So it was like a 170-year-old organization. And that really says a lot about just the commitment of the community to education. And now we have the opportunity to keep our schools strong because we know strong schools, strong community. And the bond referendum, it represents so much. And so we've been trying to figure out how do we take a look at our facilities, the impact of our facilities on students as well as student learning. And so last year in 2023, I was just getting here like 6 months in. We went out for a bond referendum, and the community is like, no, that's not quite right. What we need, let's go back to the drawing board and really think through some things. And they gave us a lot of great feedback. How do we think about our historical buildings? How do we think about the cost that our taxpayers would have to think about for several years? How do we create a very transparent process and inclusive process? And so those were all the things that we've been working on. And so here recently, we did put forward a new proposal to our community, and more or less in a survey format. So when we talk about the projects are really proposed projects at this time, and giving the community an opportunity to say, hey, does this feel right? What do you think about these things? And so, yes, really addressing a new middle school on the north side of town, because we've seen a lot of growth in that area. And so when we're working with students, so the schools and the resources, they kind of follow the students. So there's been a lot of growth in that particular area. We heard a lot about our historical buildings. And while we've not seen as much growth in some of our school areas in the neighborhoods and the communities, those buildings are still very important to our community. Mm-hmm. And so how can we rethink that? And so we were really looking at a renovation for McKinley and maybe combining one of the other middle schools and taking a look at how do we renovate Wilson. Wilson could help us absorb maybe 2 of our elementary schools. So just some innovative way of thinking about saving those buildings, but still taking care of some of our facility needs, as well as a new cafeteria. Now, that was on the old bond, a new cafeteria for Kennedy High School, because they have almost 1,800 students over there, mm-hmm. and they have one of the smallest cafeterias within our high schools. So we wanted to upgrade their cafeteria as well as give them the infrastructure that they need to prepare to launch their freshman academy.
And those kids like to eat. I have 2 teenagers.
Oh,
so.
Yes. They like to eat, right? and it's interesting how early they have to start their lunch rotations, and as many that they have to have, it goes well beyond 1 o'clock, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a long amount of time just due to space constraints. So we just really appreciate the people over there that's been working through it. So those are the 4 big projects that were put forward out to the community.
The only kind of 2 questions I've heard around the project is one of our church members asked me today, I was telling him I was going to talk to you, and he said, yeah, why are they going to build that middle school out at 100 when there's going to be 2 other schools? There'll be 3 schools. You could throw a hula hoop around them. Yeah. That didn't make sense to him. I'm sure you've heard that from other people. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you think about the middle school that's Hardin Middle School, that is going to be serving the majority of students with the proposed new middle school. And where Hardin sits right now, there's not a lot of room for us to expand, number one. We kind of back up to the Linmar School District right there. And so we really wanted to get more centralized. We have 16 buses that go in and out of Hardin just to bring our students. And so we would reduce the number of buses that would have to be at that location. And we were very fortunate to be able to have a chance to purchase the land, because actually that was one of the pieces of feedback that we received from the previous bond. Is they were like, where's that middle school going to be? Where's that land? And we were able to take that burden off of our taxpayers by going ahead and purchasing the land. And with that location, so yes, there's talk that there's a charter school coming, and there's Xavier right there. And I really rally around, and we as a school district, we're proud to be part of the educational opportunities here in the city of Cedar Rapids. And we want Cedar Rapids to be the best place to get an education in the state of Iowa, right? And so that's no matter which school you attend. And so with that being said, yeah, we want to be competitive too. We want to be right there. We want to be part of the mix. We are one of the choices. And again, we've been educating students for 170 years. And so Cedar Rapids Community School District, we're the third largest school district in the state. And we are the largest school district in the Cedar Rapids area. And so we still do educate the vast majority of students within our city.
So I misunderstood. It sounds like the three schools, the other two are private, so they're not really, it's not we're not in competition with ourselves in terms of the school
No, not
buildings.
at all.
The other thing I've heard people say is, well, why don't we just renovate one of the other buildings? But that's not feasible, is it?
Well, so we're also right-sizing our school district, looking at our facilities and the number of students that we serve. And we do have a need to reduce 1 to 2 middle schools from our inventory, right? And so we have to kind of shuffle. So that's like a domino that needs to occur in order for us to right-size. And again, when we talk about the renovation back to harden the current site. So yes, we've heard that. Why not renovate the current hardened building? Again, we want to expand the footprint, and there's not room, right, with Norridge Park. All of that kind of goes out to the Linmar School District, as well as, again, we want a more centralized location so we can reduce some of the transportation burden. And we like to be able to just turn that into green space for future needs of the school district. We do still have other needs, areas that need to be addressed. And just by maintaining that within our inventory, we already have it. And in the future, when the time is right to think about how we utilize it, again, we've had that opportunity where that would be a reduced cost to our taxpayers. So having some forethought is important as well.
And maybe that's answering my next question, which, by the way, I was a news reporter.
Oh, were you? Oh, no wonder.
That's why I have all these great questions. Yeah, I worked for 7 years as a TV news reporter with 3 different ABC stations. The last was KCRG, TV9, and then felt a call to ministry. So sorry to put you on the hot spot here, but it's just my brain is naturally wired that way.
No, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share, because I find that the more we're able to talk with people, I wish I could talk with everyone one-on-one, because people have so many questions, and oftentimes their questions are very personal to them, their finances, their educational desires for their students, where they live, all the things. And so just thank you. Just ask away. And if I don't know something, I will have to admit here in the church that I don't know it, but I can get back to you.
Well, there's forgiveness. So if we do consolidate, then what happens to those old empty buildings? They just sit there? Do they get repurposed? They get torn down?
Yeah, so in the case of Harding, we are, at this time, our thought is that we would turn it into green space, because we know we probably want to utilize that location for other facility needs in the future. You know, that's what we know today. Things are ever changing, right? But what we know today. And so when we think about some of our historical buildings, I think we've been very thoughtful in that area. So McKinley, we're looking to renovate it so that it would be able to hold more students. Franklin, we would allow it to continue to serve some of our students. We have some programs now that are out in some rental locations that we could bring back into our location, some alternative school options that we could also put in that facility. And with Wilson, that's one of our historical buildings as well. We would renovate it, and we're able to move into elementary schools, right? And so each property that we vacate, we just do an analysis. We just kind of take it on a case-by-case basis. whether or not we have a purpose for it, or whether or not it can be sold or utilized by other means. And we just kind of take a look and evaluate property by property, because each one probably have different opportunities for use.
Full disclosure here, I'm married to a school teacher. My wife, Katie, teaches fourth grade at Prairie Crest as part of college community or the Prairie School District. Mm-hmm. And I'm also for lower taxes. So, but when it comes to schools, I always say yes because it's for the kids and my wife teaches.
Well, thank you. Although that
sense.
Is over in Prairie, but I think that's the right thing. Strong schools, strong communities. And I think really working hand in hand where there are opportunities to think about housing that brings in young children in those particular areas. It all adds value to the neighborhoods. And I know you mentioned about it has been 25 years since we've had a bond initiative within the Cedar Rapids Community School District. And even at the last bond that was in 2000, that was for one school, Viola Gibson. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Great
school.
They're fantastic.
Yeah,
building.
fantastic.
Oh,
I love them. I was over there reading last week, just wonderful staff and everything. And so there is an opportunity for us to stay to our commitment. To your point, people believe in education. Some of the feedback that we've received is that people want to make sure that we continue to be a strong school district, that we are excellent in the quality that we provide, as well as that our schools are safe and secure. And I think that's one aspect of the bond proposal that I think we need to talk about more, that with some of our aging facilities and a number of repairs that are required, we want to make sure that we're elevating safety. In our newer buildings, we have technology that can easily shut off the building if there's an intruder. It can alert, all parties that need to be informed. Immediately, we have ways that we can secure children in a different way.
That's a big thing for people.
It is huge when we think about ADA accessibility. When a grandparent or just a family member, they want to attend events, fine arts events, they should have the same right and access, or our students, they should have the same rights and access through ADA compliance. And we've been grandfathered in a lot of ways, so there are opportunities to be able to upgrade some of those facilities. And I know that these are things in our community that they care about, and really just bringing our focus to the greater good. And while our priorities may differ depending on which side of town you live on, I think we all have the opportunity to unify around children, because they're the ones that are being impacted daily, as well as our staff members who are there pouring out their heart and souls each day to make sure that we are delivering contributing members of society with a great education when they leave us.
Well, you're good at this. I can see why you got the job.
Well, I am 29 years in education and just very passionate. I care deeply. When I graduated high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And I actually started working in a local factory. I was a first generation college student, and I wasn't necessarily encouraged to go off to college. And I didn't really understand that. And so one day I kind of left that factory job. I was on my lunch break and I went and enrolled myself in junior college, which would be something very similar to Kirkwood. And I just said at that point, I never want another student to graduate and not know what their options are in life. And so that kind of set me on that course. I was going to be a school counselor, but after I started teaching the first couple of years, everybody was like, you need to be an administrator because you just like to change things, direct things. And so that kind of led me on that path. And so
you can just see that in some people. And they saw that in you.
Yeah.
And the way you went. Teacher, principal, superintendent in Nebraska, now superintendent in Cedar Rapids.
Yeah.
I'm hearing you say we want to hang on to Wilson. We want to hang on to McKinley, which is just a few blocks from us. We have a number of McKinley families. So I think you guys deserve a lot of credit for keeping those historic buildings, keeping those places downtown. It sounds like this really trying to do that.
Yeah, we really want to do that. It's been great for me to spend more time in the community beyond the 3 months or 6 months that I was here last year when we went out the first time, and hearing the passion from our community around those historical buildings. The bond is very important to our future. Oftentimes I'm asked, what will happen if the bond doesn't pass? And so the very thing that we don't want to occur, if the bond doesn't pass, we're going to have to start thinking about whether or not we can keep these schools open. By passing the bond, it gives us a strategy. It gives us a path forward. It gives us the opportunity to kind of dictate a plan towards our future together, and how we think about how we protect the core and how we continue to ensure that the legacy that's been going on for 170 years of Cedar Rapids Community School District, that it continues. We recognize that we're definitely facing some uncertain times when we think about the economy. I think that's on the hearts and minds of people that we talk to on a daily basis, and really trying to make sure that we can get that price point at a place where every member of our community, that they can contribute, where, they may say, yes, I have $2 that I'm willing to give extra to my tax bill to ensure that the future is secure for the students, the families of the Cedar Rapids area, and particularly the Cedar Rapids Community School District. I think that's the opportunity that we have, Pastor Craig.
Yeah, and since I got to ask you finally, since it is the Faith First podcast, can you talk a little about your faith? You said you are a person of faith. You were raised in the church.
Yes, I grew up in the Baptist church. It's been a journey to really just discover not only what you believe, but how it shows up in a daily interaction with others, and how you find your strength. I think for me that is the most important as the superintendent of schools, is just being able to seek direction, to seek guidance, to stay humble, to think about the greater good, and how we're really in a posture of being a servant leader. And that's kind of what keeps me going. I feel like that's what brought me here to Cedar Rapids. I had never heard of Cedar Rapids before, and the opportunity was presented to me. And that anchors me back on the fact that I believe I'm living a purpose-driven life. As well as my steps are ordered, and he that beginneth a good work, he will see it through until the end. And so I think that's what keeps me going every day. That's what keeps me believing, no matter the challenges. I believe that it's already been ordained. It's already been spoken and written in heaven of how all things will play out. And just my willingness to humble myself for direction and guidance every day. You mentioned coming on to the podcast about forgiveness. I think that's so critical in many ways, and starting every day anew and fresh. I think there's an opportunity for grace, for gratefulness, and just an opportunity where there is strength in numbers.
A farm girl from Alabama, self-made woman. I feel like you should be in Iowa. You are. You feel like an Iowan to me. So
I made it. I made it. Thank you.
I hope you have a long and industrious career here at Cedar Rapids, and thanks for making some time for us today.
Yeah, thank you, Pastor Craig.
And that's a look at what's brewing around First Lutheran Church. Time to dig in the Word with Pastor Steve, and you just got back from a big trip from the state capitol.
That was yesterday. It was Lutheran Day on the Hill. Typically, it was in support of Lutheran Social Services of Iowa, and typically they have maybe 100, 150 people show up. This year they had 400 that were signed up.
A record.
We filled the Capitol with blue shirts, LSS shirts. In the morning, we gathered at Capitol Hill Lutheran Church and talked about LSI.
Which is right downtown. I mean, you can walk to the Capitol.
Yeah, it's about 3-4 blocks from the Capitol.
Cool.
Yeah, and so we walked up. And we were gathered there and talked about LSI and just simply framed it within the calling of being baptized children of God. You know, that we witness to Jesus by what we say, but also by what we do. And we seek to promote those things that make for justice and peace.
Immigration, a big issue, I imagine.
You know, they didn't talk about any issue in particular.
Oh, really?
No. It was simply about supporting the work of LSI in all aspects. So this really wasn't a particular issue gathering, as it was promoting care for the neighbor who's vulnerable, and whether that's young or old, immigrant or whatever. And that the church is a voice, really picking up from Luke chapter 4, you know, where bring good news to the poor, release to the captives.
So LSI is short for Lutheran Services in Iowa.
Yes.
Been around 160 years. It's a part of Lutheran Social Services nationwide, which kind of came under fire from Elon Musk, and there was quite a fallout. So I imagine just trying to say the legitimacy, show that this is a legitimate organization. It's been around for every president since the Civil War. It's been helping people,
long time.
Get settled immigrants, legal immigrants, and so many other things with social care.
Yeah, and the gathering of people there, it was a happy gathering. People who have positive regard for LSI and
not like an angry protest.
No. We were there milling around in the Capitol. I tried to speak to our representatives, but they were in recess, and so I missed them. There was about 80 of us that ended up in the governor's office, and she signed a proclamation of support of LSI, and it was LSI Day,
Awesome.
in the Capitol. And she talked about the good work that LSI has done over the years, and she talked about being Lutheran herself, supportive of it.
Yeah, she attends Lutheran Church of Hope.
Yes. Good words were spoken, and I think there was an encouragement for her to then follow through with all those good words that she said for LSI.
So what were your top 2 takeaways from yesterday, from the experience?
Top 2 takeaways. Yeah, I think one, just simply the 400 people that showed up. And so we're there on the rotunda, and we're on the stairs waiting to have our picture taken just as a show of support. And we sang "This Little Light of Mine, I'm Going to Let It Shine."
So
it was
awesome.
it was a positive, supportive witness. So that was one. I think the other positive takeaway is, after all the foofara in the news, to be able to have a declaration of support for LSI and a recognition for the work that they've done and continue to do.
Feels like a big victory.
There was simply a recognition that, in and of itself, LSI has done good, faithful work with the resources given to it.
Great.
So,
Sign you up for next year. We take turns as pastors leading. Interns have done it, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of time.
Yeah,
but it's great to see. I mean, Luther would approve, right? Your faith should be worked out in action, in good governance.
Yep. Right. His notion of the vocation, and this is really was our theme in Epiphany about follow Jesus everywhere. Mm-hmm. Luther talked about our roles in life, our vocations, is not just simply a calling to a profession, but we have roles as a parent, as a child, as a citizen, as a neighbor, as a worker, and there are certain requirements, or within each of those roles, there's something called from us. Mm-hmm. God does not ask us to be an indifferent son or an indifferent parent, much less an indifferent citizen.
Yeah.
There's a way in which we are called to be actively engaged to fulfill our calling. And within a democracy, there's even more called upon us that way.
So what do you have for us this weekend?
The theme for today is, remember, our theme for Lent is hungering for God. Lent is a journey in which we become aware of our need and our hunger for God. It's a journey in which we become aware of how God seeks to come to us, to fill us, to satisfy, to meet that hunger, that need. Lent is not so much a journey in which we try to fix ourselves as a journey in which we become more aware of ourselves and how God comes to heal and make us whole. Mm-hmm. In the story today about how the promises of God satisfy, I was thinking about a story when I was a kid, not so much a hole in the leg, but a hollow leg. I could eat a lot when I was in 12 or 13.
You were a swimmer.
I was a swimmer.
Yeah.
Like your sons. I mean, I could eat a horse and it wouldn't matter. And there's a guy who was in the church who was an Army sergeant in the Marines, retired, and he would bring a couple of mess plates. And so I would get this mess plate. I think it was 12 by 18 inches. It was a big mess plate.
Heavy duty.
Heavy. It didn't bend. It was metal.
Okay.
And I would layer it 3 or 4 layers up, and it was like an archaeological dig from salads down to meat to whatever underneath.
Yeah.
People would look at me behind and say, "That's not fair. There's no food left for us." But,
right.
Well, there was, but still, I was not the most. I was a teenage boy. You think about filling the hole in your leg or the hollow in your leg. Anyway, so I thought about that hunger and what will satisfy that hunger. I thought about as you grow up, maybe you become aware of that hole in your heart, that sort of loneliness when you are alone and seeking companionship. That in marriage and in a life with another person, there can be a fullness there. And understanding as I've lived through life that actually there's an intensity to young love, but in a sense, that intensity does not match the depth of those who, after 50 or 60 years when a spouse dies, and then you realize the hole in their life. And it will never be filled. I mean, you live with, there's a way in which we give thanks and we remember, fully what we have been able to appreciate, but you also know there's nothing that will fill it, or we become aware of that.
And not quite the same.
It's not the same, but it's that hole. Mm-hmm. It was Pascal who talked about the way we are made. There is sort of this space, this God-shaped space in our soul that only God can fill. And until that happens, there's a way in which we are restless and yearning and seeking and wondering. The story of humanity, and especially in the Scriptures, the ways in which we try to fill that hole, that emptiness, with all kinds of things. And we do not really ultimately experience satisfaction or fullness until we learn to let it be filled with the grace and goodness of God. It was Augustine who said, "Our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you, O God." We've got two stories today that touch upon, I think, this sense of hunger and yearning and the ways in which we try to fill it and we're not satisfied. In Abraham, in the story from Genesis, God has actually led him on a journey, and he promised him land and people and a blessing. It's 2 chapters later, maybe a couple of years later, and Abraham still doesn't have that, and he's growing restless, and he's wondering, and he questions, and he's hungry. And God comes to him, and he takes him out into the outside of the tent, and it's dark, and it's at night, and he says, "Look at the stars," and see the stars, and in the desert at night, you can see the stars.
Yeah.
And he said, your family will be bigger than the number of stars that you see in the heavens. And then he said, now kick the dirt. And this land that you're standing on will be yours. It will belong to your family. Now, it's interesting in Hebrews chapter 11, the writer of Hebrews said, Abraham in that moment trusted that those promises would be true, but they stayed promises. Their fulfillment did not happen until after Abraham lived and died. He had Isaac, but from Isaac there came Jacob, and then the tribes of Jacob, and then the family of Israel. But what happened in that moment is that Abraham shifted so that he allowed the promises of God to actually guide his life and to shape it. He will still struggle, but yet it is now something different in the life of Abraham. We come to Jesus in the gospel lesson, and it's not so much about Jesus in this case directly, but it's about Herod, who is after Jesus. And they said, Jesus, you got to leave quickly because Herod and his soldiers they're going to arrest you because they think you're John the Baptist. You're just a troublemaker. They're going to put you down. Jesus said, this is not going to happen in Galilee. He says, I got to make my way to Jerusalem. But then he talks about how in Jerusalem he's going to be met with opposition. So whether Galilee, where he's coming from, he's being opposed, or going to Jerusalem, he's being opposed. But in both of those oppositions, we're meeting up with the human family that doesn't know what to do with God, that's sort of pushing God's promises away, seeking a way of either power or control. And so how does God respond? In Jesus, God says, listen, I come like a mother hen who wants to gather her chicks and to embrace and to save and bring you together. And Jesus then, in a sense, goes on to say, I come not to judge, but to save. I come not to condemn, but to forgive. I come not to give death, but to offer life. I come not to push you away, but to gather you in. I come in promise. I think in this journey of Lent, as we make our way to the cross, one of the things we learn to do is to say, well, what does it mean then to live in the promises of God and how they satisfy? I think one of the challenges with that is that promises as a promise are always on the way to fulfillment. They're not done. And it's in Hebrews chapter 11 where the writer talks about, to trust and live into those promises are to live as if they are fully true now, even as you're waiting for them to be completed. Is one of the men at our men's Bible study had a beautiful observation. He says, what does it mean to trust and to wait in the promises of God? And he observed, you can think about that word wait in two ways. One is to wait and to do nothing. I'm waiting for you. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm just
waiting
waiting
for something to
for
happen.
Godot. I mean,
Yep.
just waiting for something, doing nothing. But there's another way in which you wait. You think about a waiter or a waitress. You serve. There's another way of living and trusting in the promises of God. And then in this time of waiting, we wait. We serve one another. We live as if these promises are true and fulfilled. And so what does it mean then to use those promises to live with another human being? If the people had been waiting for God, waiting on God's promises, Herod would not have been after Jesus. He would not have faced the cross.
So let me take this analogy to the next step so I just make sure I understand. I love
Yep.
it. It's beautiful, that waiting. When a waiter waits on a customer, they're serving the customer.
Yes.
So in this case, if you're waiting on God, are you serving God?
I think you do both. And actually, Jesus puts it that way in Matthew 25. He said, when you waited on the least of these, when you gave water to the thirsty, clothing, shelter, you waited on me. Mm-hmm. You served me. There is a way in which to live a life of service is not simply to serve on behalf of God, but we have this experience that in our life we end up meeting God. God comes to us. That's what Jesus is doing in this gospel lesson. I'm like a mother hen who would gather. If we were living faithfully and waiting on one another, we would experience being gathered in the embrace of God.
It's one of the few analogies where God is kind of put to the feminine, a hen,
Yes,
a mother
mother
hen.
hen. Yeah.
God being like a mother hen gathering us together.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's a beautiful analogy.
Yeah. So we have this notion of hungering for God and how the promises of God can satisfy and turn our hearts to live in a different way.
Great message. Can't wait to hear more of it, Pastor Steve.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being with us.
Hello, my name is Sheila Anderson, and I serve as Visitation Chaplain at First Lutheran Church. I'd like to take a few minutes now on this podcast to pray with you and for you this week. Holy God, you long to gather your church under your wings. Bless the churches of Jerusalem and all persecuted churches, that your people may take heart and stand firm as they witness and minister in your name. Holy God, you give shelter to living things as numerous as the stars. Strengthen the voice of prophets who call humanity to faithful care for the planet, that they would not be silenced, but heeded as your messengers. Holy God, you raised up leaders like Abram, Sarai, and Paul to show your people what it means to rely on your promises. Guide today's leaders to work for justice and safeguard the world for future generations. Holy God, you are the stronghold of our life. Care tenderly for those who are ill in body or mind, and for people living in fear or need. May all know they are not alone. Holy God, you offer us citizenship in heaven. Unite communities of faith who are divided over earthly things, that following the way of your Son, they may set aside grudges and serve their neighbors with generosity and love. Holy God, you are our light and our salvation. We give thanks for the saints who have gone before us. Help us to trust in you as they did and to live according to their example. Receive the prayers of your people and draw all things together in your love, in the name of Jesus, who leads us from death to life. Amen.
Thank you, Sheila, for those prayers. We appreciate you, as well as Pastor Steve for stopping by today. And, of course, Dr. Grover as well. I was talking to her after we got done recording. I said, what's the next step here? Is there a vote coming up? And she said, well, if there is a bond, it will be a vote in November. But at this point, they're not even sure there is a bond going to happen. Right now, they're asking people to engage, to ask questions, to come to understanding and see if, I guess, the project is viable. So there you go. And now is your opportunity to give her and the school district feedback. And if there is a vote around in November, that's when it would take place. Thanks again for being with us this day. We look forward to speaking with you next week. Until then, remember to put your faith first. I don't think I was recording that whole time.
Are you kidding me? Okay.
How many times have we done this and I have not done that? And only on the day we're trying to re-record, right?
Yeah, I gave you my 10 minute, best 10 minutes.
It was perfect.
Okay.
Where do you want to start from?
Well, we'll start from the beginning. Push record.
It's recording.
Now it's recording?
Now it's recording. Okay.
Take it from the top.
All right.